that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
The Israel-Hamas war. Stay with CBS News for continuing coverage.
Do not be fearful if you believe your philosophy brings people more freedom. Do not be fearful that you could lose your job over it.
If I leave, they win. If I leave, the bullies take place. This is bullying.
I think President Trump was the right president at the right time. Chaos follows him. You know I'm right. Chaos follows him.
We will win re-election. There is too much at stake, and the American people know it.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. 2023 here in Washington could be summarized just as much by what didn't happen by what did. The year began with gridlock on Capitol Hill when House Republicans took 15 rounds, remember that, of voting to select Kevin McCarthy as their speaker. Then fast forward to October, and some in his own party kicked him out. Beyond the speakership drama, this year's Congress failed to pass a long-term government funding bill. They made no real bipartisan progress on border security, and they didn't pass new end-of-the-year funding for both Ukraine and for Israel. Well, CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now. Ed, you've been wrapping up the year with us here in the office. Now we can do it on America Decides. What should we expect from the White House in 2024 based on what happened over the past year?
Well, they're going to have to finish all the unfinished business. Once again today, a reminder of how acute the border crisis has become, with another 10,000 apprehended yesterday, and now a feud brewing between the White House and the Speaker over what exactly the president can and should be doing about the situation. It's a reminder that that issue of border security and immigration policy sits in the middle of that broader debate over how exactly to ensure funding for the ongoing wars in Ukraine and Israel and other issues around the world that the president's been seeking. So with Congress set to come back in early January, and with talks continuing between Republican and Democratic senators and the White House about a potential deal, the Speaker today throwing down the gauntlet, saying the president should be restoring the Remain in Mexico program that forced migrants to stay in that country while they were seeking asylum in the U.S. They should be able to more quickly round up those that are not seeking asylum and are here illegally. In essence, trying to shut down the border through U.S. policy and force the president to do that. The White House says they've done everything they can on the issue. The Speaker's office turns around and says, no, they haven't, and that's insulting to the American people.
Ed, if you could take off your White House correspondent cap for just a moment and remember when we were reporters together on Capitol Hill, studying the leadership in both chambers. And we know that President Biden has a close relationship with Senator McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate. But what's your read, what's your assessment about President Biden's relationship with the new Speaker, Mike Johnson, and how that could play out in the coming year? What are you really watching on that front?
Well, it's almost non-existent as far as we can tell, right? And these are guys that had met one other time before they had their formal conversations right after Johnson became Speaker, and they probably need to get together and, break bread or at least have a long meeting together and get to a sense of each other's policy priorities and a little more about themselves personally. The problem is they don't want to put the president in a room with a guy who may or may not be Speaker in a few weeks, depending on how things go, because there's that threat. They don't want to put him in the room because this is a guy who wants to at least support an ongoing inquiry into impeaching him, and supported the former president's push to stay in office even though he'd lost the election. So, in some respects, the White House doesn't mind the distance now between the White House and Republican congressional leadership, because as we get closer to an election, they can sit there and go, well, see, it's their fault, and you shouldn't be, lumping us in with an inactive Republican Congress. But for a president who, as you say, has valued his relationships with people like Mitch McConnell, you'd think he'd want to have one with the speaker. And we asked again today, and they said, no, there's no plan for them to meet. There's no plan for them to get together in the new year and try to hash this out as normally a speaker and a president might be able to.
Ed, dig into that a little bit more for us. So if the president is not going to be directly engaging very much with the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who should we be watching in terms of who can be the deal makers on Capitol Hill with this administration? Who in the Senate, who maybe even in the House, are going to be able to craft the contours of a deal on immigration, on the border, on Ukraine funding, on Israel? If it's not going to be the president and the speaker, who's it going to be?
Right now, the three most critical negotiators among senators are Chris Murphy, the Democrat of Connecticut, Kyrsten Sinema, the independent from Arizona, and James Lankford, the Republican of Oklahoma. They've taken the lead on that piece that most of the Senate believes if you can figure that out, everything else is gravy and should move pretty quickly. What happens once it goes to the House? That's a good question, and we don't entirely know. The White House doesn't know. Congressional leadership doesn't seem to know. At least Senate leadership doesn't know quite how it would go in the House. And that's the big unknown going into next year is, okay, let's say the Senate does pull it off and pass something quickly with a looming partial government shutdown coming in mid-January. What happens when it all goes over to the House remains a big mystery, in part because we don't know to what extent Speaker Johnson has true read or control of his conference. We don't know what parts of that conference might really revolt and over what aspects of that deal they might revolt over.
Is Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, the Democrat, does he have the full blessing of the White House to kind of be the point man for Democrats, or is he more of a lone ranger?
No, he seems to have it. They wouldn't have the Homeland Security Secretary, the White House Chief of Staff, engaged in those ongoing talks and helping him and the other negotiators with the details of, well, if we do this, what does this mean? If we do that, what does it mean? If they didn't trust him. More importantly, he also has Leader Schumer's backing and blessing to sort it out because he's just decided to take it on and believes with Senator Lankford and Senator Sinema they can try to get something done. And Murphy's somebody that the White House has consulted before because he's somebody who's got a foreign policy portfolio, obviously takes great interest and concern on issues like gun control. President likes him. He's met with the president a few times and keeps in touch with him. So, yes, in essence, he is negotiating this on behalf of the White House and most of the Democratic caucus, but, of course, progressives in the House, Latino lawmakers or other border state Democrats have some concerns about what may ultimately be negotiated, and we'll see how it goes.
Fascinating reporting from Ed O'Keefe, the person to watch, that where the power seems to be, at least in part, Senator Chris Murphy. Ed O'Keefe, thanks for all those insights. We appreciate it. Meanwhile, former President Trump will be busy in 2024. Not only will he be, of course, on the campaign trail, but for much of next year, he'll also be in the courtroom. CBS News campaign reporter Katrina Kaufman joins us now from New York. Katrina, thanks for being here. Let's begin with what's happening in New York, the civil fraud trial Trump faces, the final argument set for January. That case seems to infuriate Trump, the former president. What are you watching there?
I would agree. I actually think this trial has been so much more interesting than maybe people give it credit for. I think it's super personal to Trump. I think it goes to the heart of who he is as a businessman, as a real estate mogul. Closing arguments are on January 11th, and we'll see what penalties Judge Engoron has for him. And I think that this is actually going to be very consequential. I've heard that he cares a lot about this trial, maybe even talks about it more than any of the others.
But that's not the only thing in New York. When you're our top reporter on all of these cases, thinking through them every day, when you look at New York City alone, New York State, there's the civil fraud case that's ongoing that you just mentioned. There's also the E. Jean Carroll case. What should we expect there? And also the hush money payments case, among others. What about New York has your attention in the coming year?
There are a couple things. I think one interesting thing I saw today about the E. Jean Carroll trial is that they actually want to use depositions and testimony of Trump from the New York civil fraud trial, where Trump is talking about how much cash he has, how much his brand is worth, how it's the, maybe the hottest brand in the world, and they're seeking damages in that trial. So really, it's bolstering an argument for them that Trump can really afford to pay a lot of damages. And then regarding the hush money case, I read an interesting piece by Harvard professor Larry Tribe, and he was saying, maybe people aren't giving this case enough credit. If Jack Smith's case in D.C. gets pushed, this will be the first criminal trial against Trump, and it could really have a lot of importance.
Let's bring up a graphic here of the possible Trump trial start date. You have the federal election interference case. Katrina just mentioned that with special counsel scheduled to start in March. You have the hush money payments case. You have the Mar-a-Lago documents case scheduled to begin later in the spring. Then the Georgia case. A lot on former President Trump's plate.
Yeah.
What about the special counsel? You said it could be pushed back. It's scheduled for March. What could cause it to be pushed back?
Well, of course, there's this issue of Trump's presidential immunity claim. We're currently waiting to see if the Supreme Court is going to take that up. If not, they're going to hear about it in the Court of Appeals. And, you know, I guess we'll have to see. Currently, the case is on pause while this gets determined. So there's a possibility that the March 4th date could be pushed. I mean, talking to legal experts, some people I've talked to think it's going to stay. Others think this case could maybe be in April, maybe even May, just depending on how things play out. So that, I think really the Supreme Court is the other thing to watch. We might have 3, possibly even 4 cases related to Trump and January 6th going to the Supreme Court now.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you for your reporting. We'll certainly be talking to you a lot in the coming weeks.
Thanks for having me.
Now, thousands of migrants, they're crossing the southern border every day. How is the U.S. Border Patrol handling that spike? And what are the politics of the situation? We'll have all of that next. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me, and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. U.S. immigration agents are dealing with a major spike in migration at the southern border. Immigration continues to be a vexing issue for both the White House and for Congress. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now. Thanks for being here, Camilo. What is the latest situation at the border in terms of numbers of migrants coming across to the United States?
Hi, Bob. We're in the Texas border town of Eagle Pass. It is now one of the epicenters of the intensifying crisis here along the U.S. Mexico border. More than 10,000 migrants were apprehended by U.S. Border Patrol agents in just the past 24 hours, including 4,000 here in the Del Rio sector of Texas. As you can tell, Texas has been assembling razor wire here, concertina wire here, to deter illegal crossings, Bob. But I can tell you that we have witnessed hundreds and dozens of migrants enter the U.S. illegally, despite the concertina wire here. We saw parents with really small children, Bob, get through this wire here. Many of them have left their belongings here, as you can tell, bags, clothing, and other supplies here, because they need to be processed by Border Patrol agents who right now are completely overwhelmed by the spike in migration. And I can tell you, Bob, that just on the other side of the town here, there are hundreds of migrants still waiting in a makeshift staging area to be processed by Border Patrol. Many of them have spent the night there because the agency is so overwhelmed by, again, the spike in migration. And so this really does illustrate, Bob, the dire challenges that the federal government is facing here along the border.
What's causing the spike?
Well, we've heard from Border Patrol agents, volunteers, and the migrants, and it seems to be a confluence of factors, a perfect storm, if you will. You have a highly profitable smuggling network on the other side of this river in the Rio Grande in Mexico that is driving migration to the U.S. border. They're telling migrants that the U.S. border is open right now. Migrants are becoming desperate in Mexico. They cannot get an appointment through a Biden administration program that is allowing some asylum seekers to go to official crossings to enter the country legally. And so they're just crossing the river, swimming with their children, and getting through this razor wire. It is really a dire and striking scene here along the U.S.-Mexico border. The other factor is obviously conditions in countries like Venezuela. 7 million Venezuelans, Bob, have left that country in just the past few years. Most of the migrants we met here are from that country.
What is the political response in Washington to this unfolding situation?
Well, as you know, Bob, this has been a vexing issue for every administration, Republican and Democrat. But the situation here is unprecedented, both in its humanitarian but also national security implications. And the Biden administration right now, as you know, is entertaining these sweeping border policies to convince Republicans in Congress to support additional aid to Ukraine. The administration is considering agreeing to a new authority that will allow agents to just expel migrants across the river into Mexico without processing their claims when there's a certain threshold met in terms of illegal crossings. And so those talks are ongoing in Congress, but there is a general agreement between Republicans, moderate Democrats, and the White House that asylum needs to be restricted, that immigration detention needs to be expanded. And it is, in many ways, a seismic shift for an administration, Bob, that, as you know, came into office denouncing many of these policies that resemble what the Trump administration did here along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Is there any issue that you see as the key snag in the coming weeks as those talks continue?
Yes. While there's general agreement on restricting asylum, Bob, and creating this expulsion authority to deport people back to Mexico quickly when Border Patrol agents are overwhelmed, there is a sticking point as it relates to the issue of humanitarian parole. It is this law that the Biden administration has been using to resettle hundreds of thousands of Afghan evacuees, Ukrainian refugees, and Latin American migrants and Haitian migrants who have U.S. sponsors. Republicans want to severely limit that authority because they say it is allowing people who shouldn't be in the U.S. in the first place to stay here. But the Biden administration says that is a key tool to divert people to legal channels so they don't cross this river and this razor wire here illegally.
Camilo Montoya Galvez on the ground reporting for CBS News. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
The Cook Political Report is now moving 2 states President Biden won in 2020 to a toss-up. Coming up next, the latest on the president's re-election bid. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows
We need to step up and help them.
and a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We will win re-election. There is too much at stake, and the American people know it.
Welcome back to America Decides. That, of course, was Vice President Kamala Harris in September on CBS's Face the Nation when asked about the threat of a second Trump presidency. And this week, the Cook Political Report is shifting its battleground map ahead of next year, moving Michigan and Nevada from lean Democratic to toss-up. A Republican hasn't won Nevada in a general election since George W. Bush as president, running for re-election, did in 2004. Braxton Booker and Deepa Shivram join us now. Braxton is a national political reporter for Politico. Deepa is a White House correspondent for NPR. Great to have you both here. We really appreciate it. Let's begin by looking at this Cook Political Report. It says on the Cook Political Report's website, their latest memo here, President Biden's weak political standing helps push Michigan and Nevada from lean Democratic to toss-up. Do you buy the Cook Political Report's assessment here, Braxton and Deepa?
Well, look, I think that clearly Biden is not in the strongest position right now. So having Michigan and Nevada move in this direction is not really a surprise, given how close Democrats were in just getting over the hump with the Senate race in 2022. Catherine Cortez Masto only won by less than a percentage point there, showing that Democrats are really kind of teetering on the edge on turning voters out. And Michigan was a surprise for a lot of folks in 2022. They now control everything in Michigan, but again, those margins are very, very thin. So with Biden now on the ballot in 2024, it's very unclear whether or not there's enough support or enough energy to get Democrats out.
I wonder what exactly causes this. You look at the CBS News poll on the economy, we can show it right here. 62% disapprove of the president's handling of the economy, 38% approve. How are Democrats going to counter this perception, even if they don't believe it's the reality?
Right. That is something we ask the White House all of the time, right? Like, this message is not resonating with the American people. President Biden himself just yesterday or 2 days ago using the word Bidenomics, he's not shying away from this. He's trying to say, give it time, give it time. The American people will feel this in their wallets. And guess what? The American people are not feeling this in their wallets. People's perception of the economy, despite inflation improving, despite the economy looking a little bit better, they're not giving the president credit for this, even when some of his programs are popular, even when some of his, big pieces of legislation when it comes to climate, when it comes to jobs, infrastructure are popular. You travel around the country, you talk to voters, and they either don't know what the president has done or they're not willing to give him enough credit for this work. So it's a messaging problem, and the White House hasn't really shifted gears on it too much. They have started to take a harsher tone, attacking Donald Trump, attacking these extreme Republicans in Congress. Just the other day, he was in Wisconsin and went after Ron Johnson repeatedly in his remarks when he was talking about, supporting black small businesses. So it's a two-step thing, right? Trying to talk about their accomplishments, what they see as their accomplishments, and also making sure folks know what the other side is doing. And whether or not voters are really connecting with that message, still a little bit unclear.
Right.
And Republicans are having their own battle, especially in Iowa. The latest CBS News poll we can show you right here shows the former president, Donald Trump, well ahead in Iowa, 58%. Ron DeSantis in second in Iowa, 22%. Nikki Haley starting to tick up in New Hampshire, but in Iowa at 13%. The others struggling in Iowa. As we turn into January, where does the Republican race stand?
So far, it's still a race for second, right? Donald Trump still, given all his legal woes, remains the dominant force in the Republican Party.
Could that change? Could that change?
I don't see that changing unless there is a conviction in one of these cases and the party starts to turn. Look, I think Nikki Haley is getting some favorable coverage because of how far her campaign has come and how much of a surge she's been able to generate in the last couple of months, especially after strong debate performances. But we're still talking about Trump as if he's not a factor when he absolutely is the dominant force there. And Nikki Haley is really changing a lot of the narrative around what could be the possibility if Republican voters start to turn on Donald Trump. But right now, that is not a reality.
Let's look at the New Hampshire poll. In New Hampshire, Trump's at 44%. Former Ambassador Nikki Haley at 29%. She's rising there. You said the narrative could be changing on Haley, but Trump remains the front runner. How is the White House? How are Democrats looking at Haley and your own Republican sources as well? Do they see this tick up of Haley as something they need to start to really factor into their own 2024 calculations or not?
It's a little bit mixed. I think you see, especially when it comes to talking about abortion, which is something this White House and particularly Vice President Kamala Harris, a major messenger on this issue, trying to draw those contrasts, right? And so they're not ignoring, the Nikki Haleys of the world and what these other candidates are saying, but they know that Donald Trump is the force that they're fighting here. And when you hear the president talk in these fundraisers, where he gets a little bit more, he's able to speak a little bit more freely about this election and his opposition candidates, you hear him use very strong language talking about Donald Trump, comparing him to language that came out of the 1930s in Germany. This is the direction that they are definitely pivoting in, and so that I think is the road that you can expect them to go further down.
And the White House is bringing up Adolf Hitler and saying Trump's rhetoric it has echoes, if not echoes, a direct link to the language of the 1930s, of Nazism, of fascism. What does that say about how this campaign might shake out? And are voters listening to how the stakes are being framed by President Biden?
So far, I don't think so, right? I think obviously that is prime messaging for the White House. What else would they do in this case? You finally heard Donald Trump even mention Hitler this week, talking about, I haven't read Mein Kampf, right? Like the first time you really have heard a presidential candidate even bring this up unsolicited on the campaign trail. But look, this is still the guy who brought up American carnage during his inauguration address. This is a guy who came down the golden escalators.
Called his opponents vermin.
Called opponents vermin, talking about folks coming across the border. They're not bringing their best, they're bringing rapists. So this is just a continuation of the rhetoric that we're seeing from Trump. But so far, it doesn't seem like Democrats have a really good, solid message that is driving the point home. And certainly what Democrats need to do is talk about their policies like we were talking about. They have to talk about their wins. They have to talk about their policy achievements. And the more time you spend talking about Donald Trump's rhetoric, you're not talking about your achievements. And I think that is what voters are paying attention to.
Also get the enthusiasm, right? They're talking about it, but are people enthusiastic about going to the polls and voting for Joe Biden right now? I don't know if that's the case.
Very quickly, what are you watching in 2024 as a reporter?
I think the way that this Biden-Harris ticket will have to reinvigorate younger voters in particular, especially about, what is going on with Israel and Gaza, especially about issues that have to do with the climate, which is another issue they have been deeply critical about with this administration. They're going to have to turn things around. Looking at those numbers, looking at that decision from Cook out of Nevada and Michigan, that should be really concerning for them. And this is a very critical base. And I think their messaging there and how they're going to go forward is interesting.
Very quickly.
Look, black voters. The Democrats are losing black voters. Look, overwhelmingly, black voters still are supporting Democrats, but you're seeing some black voters in some polls say 1 in 5 are saying that they would vote for Donald Trump. And if the Democrats are losing the base of the base, that is really, really bad news for Democrats heading in 2024.
Braxton Booker and Deepa Shivram, we really appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for coming, and hope you come back. That does it for us today on America Decides. Until 2024, we'll see you in the new year. You're streaming CBS News.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding